in and out of the Beltway. From large cities to small towns to the rural heartland. From sea to shining sea. This is Wehman, Brunson, and Vernuccio. Inside the News.
Welcome back to the program Inside the News. Glad to have you with us on all our radio affiliates across the country. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in just a moment here, but let's introduce our guys. Ben Brunson, and he's from the Sunshine State as well as I am, and he's in the bottom middle if you're watching us on YouTube. How you doing today, Ben?
I'm doing great, enjoying what the British would call a proper winter day in Florida, where it's in the low 40s outside right now.
Hey, and we'll take it because we know what happens in July. It's 93 and humidity of 93.
Yes, we get paid back hard.
Yeah, we will probably get paid back hard. And Frank Vernuccio, he's in the top left corner if you're watching us on YouTube. How you doing today, Frank?
Doing well, and 40, Ben, sounds tropical to me.
And Ben, are you going to ask Frank what state he's in? I'll let you ask the question this week.
Well, I figure he's in the deep state due to the foot of snow outside.
Ooh, that's a good one. Is that the state you were thinking of, Frank?
I'll take it.
We do want to thank our radio affiliates. And if you like the program, please call your radio affiliate. Make sure that you jot yourself a note. And on Monday, call the radio station and say, thank you so much for carrying Inside the News. We appreciate the program. All right. And I'll tell you what, Frank, we've got to get right to it because we got some salient and some salient. Is that a good word for the topics? I don't know. Relief payments. Yeah, right. They're really messing around with the stimulus stuff on Capitol Hill, aren't they, Frank?
You know, the story that seems to have evaporated from the news is why a clean bill couldn't have been timely passed back in August. And we know what the answer is. Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer didn't want a bill passed in August for relief of COVID because it might have made Donald Trump look good going into the election. So all of you folks who have been desperately waiting for that extra couple of dollars that a relief bill could provide, say thank you to Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer for keeping it away from you. That is the story that the media refuses to talk about at all. The other issue that has come up in all of this is, why can't we have a clean bill? And the answer again is thanks to Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer. The bill that was supposed to do something very simple, provide some extra cash in the pockets of American families during the COVID lockdown. But the Democrats wanted to do all sorts of things with that bill. They wanted to extort the American public into paying for all sorts of Democrat projects and Democrat givebacks, so they would hold that money until you agreed to do that. Well, the election is over, and lo and behold, the Democrats in charge now want to give you that money since there's no election for them to worry about. Will they still try to extort the American public into paying for all sorts of Democrat projects and perhaps into bailing out all those mismanaged Democrat-run states? Looks like that's going to happen.
You know something, Ben, I just, out of curiosity, went to irs.gov and, typed into where's my payment. And they're still talking about the first payment. If you have not gotten your first payment yet, and I would dare say not everybody, maybe a small percentage have gotten this $600 payment that they were supposed to have sent out. And I think this thing is totally botched up. What is your take on that?
I hope most people have gotten their first payment, and I think most have. At this point, I can only agree with Frank. There should be a clean bill to get relief to the average taxpayer that is not wrapped up in the politics of bailing out the blue states, which we know is on the table, and on trying to institutionalize the patterns, the voting issues and patterns that gave the Democrats the White House this last time around. There is a lot of attempts by the Democrats to, of course, to essentially legalize ballot harvesting and fraudulent voting practices and enforce those on the states. That I hope the Republicans will fight to the death, because that'll be the end of our democracy if that happens. The Democrats want the same type of rules that have driven California to where it is. Anyone can vote. Just if you have a pulse and you show up, we're going to take your vote. Ballot harvesting will be legalized. These are disastrous policies. No corporation, no left-leaning corporation will institute these policies when it comes to their own affairs. They fight all of these same policies, and yet they support these policies when it comes to voting at the federal level in this country. It's insanity. Again, I'll go back to a recurring theme for me. Where's the Supreme Court of the United States? All these unconstitutional ideas and provisions that are being pushed on the country. Where's the Supreme Court? Nowhere to be seen, unfortunately.
Yeah, we're going to talk about the Supreme Court in our fourth segment of today's program. And Ben kind of led into this a little bit, Frank, and the totalitarian regime is now trying to put a foothold in Washington, D.C., Frank.
You know, there are tides in the affairs of man. We saw after the American Revolution, the French Revolution came about. After the Second World War, we saw the decolonization era. We seem to be back into an era of repressive government. And I am including what the Democrats are doing in the United States as well. We're going to talk later on in the program about Myanmar. We can talk about how Putin is destroying all hopes of democracy in Russia. And we're seeing this here in the United States as well. It seems that the concepts of citizen participation in government is becoming an old-fashioned idea that is being pushed out. Whether we're talking about the input of the average citizen in Washington, we're talking about Washington being fenced off and being manned by National Guard troops. We're talking about the story that recently broke where Nancy Pelosi apparently talked to the National Guard about mounting crew-manned machine guns to fire at protesters outside the Capitol. You know, we are seeing this return to a totalitarian regime. For those of us who are history buffs, it sounds a lot like the tide the world turned to in the late 1920s, early 1930s, where the fascist movement in Europe and Japan began to take hold. It's worrisome, but it's there.
You know something, Ben, as Frank was talking there, it reminded me, let's go back to the founding of our country in the late 1700s. That's why this country was founded, and it's called the Great Experiment. Well, the experiment did work, and democracy did work, and yet the elites, you know, the feudal system that these top people want to rule the bottom people is still always there, and they still want to do it, and they still want to control everybody's actions and everything. And yet the United States was still that shining light on the hill, so to speak, that democracy did work. And this great experiment was truly not more than an experiment, as more than that, rather. It truly was the gem of the world.
Certainly. And the United States has led freedom, the cause of freedom and individual liberties and rights on a global basis. Without the United States, the world would look very different right now. And the United States in particular has led to the growth of wealth for the average person on this planet to a level that has never existed before. And, you know, our system of freedom and capitalism and freedom go hand in hand. One cannot exist without the other. Capitalism is free markets. It's the ability of the individual to express their choices economically by voting with their money. That is the system that has brought about this wealth explosion over the last 200 years, which again has elevated everyone's standard of living globally. It is so critical that our children be taught how exceptional we have been as a country, and how critically important freedom and capitalism hand in hand is to the development of the planet and not just our country. And yet they're taught exactly the opposite in most schools at virtually all levels, from first grade all the way through PhD programs. They're being taught virtually the opposite these days. And it augurs very poorly for our future, unfortunately.
Ben, you've been in Europe a number of different times. And when you come back to the United States, it's like a breath of fresh air. The old stuff in Europe is really nice, but there is this sense of freedom in the United States that's not there. And yet it seems like Obama and these people, they keep wanting to go back to that European Union model, Ben.
Well, that's very true. And it goes hand in hand with what I was just saying. I am conservative because I had the great privilege, because my father was an airline pilot, that I could travel overseas for free, basically. And I could travel as a teenager to Latin America, to Asia, to Europe, on trips that cost $20 a day to go do. And I took advantage of that. And when you travel, especially back then, and you see the difference between the United States and the rest of the world, and it holds true to this day, you realize what a special country we were blessed to have been born into, being American citizens. And to see such an unbridled attempt to destroy that by the whole Democratic Party. The Democratic Party used to share my beliefs that I just laid out 30, 40 years ago. They just had a little difference in how to help the common person out there. The Democratic Party today has abandoned all of that. It is a party of elitism, of globalism, the party that believes the US is a horrible nation, because so many of these people have been taught that all their life now. So we are reaping the whirlwind, unfortunately, from having lost our educational institutions.
Frank, have you noticed that every time that Joe Biden is on camera, Kamala Harris is right there? It's almost like, I want to make sure that you don't screw this up and that you're doing what you're told. And I am the overseer. So when you sign an executive order, I want to make sure that you put your name on this, because Joe, you're losing your mind and you got Alzheimer's and we don't trust you. I mean, is that cross thought your mind any, Joe? I mean, Frank?
Well, he has Kamala on one side and Jill Biden on the other. I'm somewhat uncomfortable when people talk about Joe Biden has lost it because of his age. He never had it in the first place. You can go back and you look at Joe Biden's speeches. You look at his career. The man was never that bright.
That's right.
He lost one of his presidential bids in the past because he plagiarized speeches of somebody else. If you look at his positions, I mean, if this were a Republican who had the positions in his past that Joe Biden has, he would be considered a racist, unfit for office. The fact of the matter is, Joe Biden has been treated so gently by the media because he is a front man. And going to the essence of your question, Joe Biden perhaps has Kamala Harris always on his side because Joe Biden is only the figurehead president. He is an older guy who we are taught to believe he's somewhat moderate simply because of his age, when in fact he is one of the hardest, probably the hardest left president we have ever had. But he looks a little bit older, he speaks a little bit gentler, and so he's the front man for all those people who are really pushing the buttons of running this country.
This is Inside the News. Wehman, Brunson, and Vernuccio. Ben, I know you have a take on that question. Go.
Well, the one thing Joe Biden has figured out, and he certainly, I'm sure, learned by watching the Clintons get exceedingly wealthy, obscenely wealthy, is how to play the graft game, which is so prevalent in Washington, D.C. And we're going to talk more about this later, but the graft game is out of control. Everybody who goes to Washington now goes there, even the young socialists like AOC, who's quickly becoming insanely wealthy, and making sure that payments go to her boyfriend. Maxine Waters, who made $1 million payments to her daughter through all her campaign money. The graft game is out of control. Everybody's getting wealthy. They go to Washington to become wealthy. This is the stuff of third world dictatorships and banana republics. And that is what we become. And that is the group of people who hated Donald Trump and fought against him, because he was trying to end that type of gravy train for entrenched politicians selling their re-election campaigns and their votes in return for money. And they're all getting wealthy. The Bidens have become insanely wealthy as a result. And this is our country is in great peril because of this. It is destroying the fabric of our nation. And it is unfortunately the reality that we face. And Joe Biden is right out front in terms of leading the gravy train.
This is Inside the News. We are so grateful and thankful that you have tuned us in, whether it's on the radio affiliates across the country or even on AUN TV or YouTube. Thank you so much for that. Make sure that you subscribe and hit the like button if you're on YouTube. Frank Vernuccio, he's with the American Analysis and News and Media, and with the Minute Report for America. You can find him at usagovpolicy.com. Ben Brunson, he's the author of the Falstaff Enigma and Esther Sling. You can find his books at Amazon.com. Great Christmas presents. We thank you so much for getting those back then, but you can stock up for this year. How about that? And you can also find him at benbrunson.com. You can find us at itnradio.com. We have to take a time out. We'll be back.
You're listening to Wehman, Brunson, and Vernuccio, Inside the News.